Uh, Thank you for coming in this rainy day in New York. We are very grateful for your presence. My name is Pavla Niklova. I'm the Executive Director of the Václav Havel Library Foundation, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you at the Bohemian National Hall for a talk by Martin Putna. Let me start to inform you that this night is a part of our program that we call Havel Conversation Series, and they include discussions, panel talks, or lectures on the most profound issues facing the global community: freedom, human rights, the state of democracy, and global citizenship. The last conversation that we prepared was in June. It was called The Ticket to the New World, and a part of the conversation was also the exhibition that you can still see around you. So I'd like to encourage you to look at it before you leave. It was prepared by Eva Hay, Czech-American photographer, curator, and project manager of the Czech National Trust. And you can see images by two photographers, graphic design, and also political caricature by Adolf Hofmeister, Antonín Pelt. So the whole project is about Czech artists and art managers who managed to escape Czechoslovakia before the war and found their second home in New York. So there's a book also that you can buy online. You can also scan the QR code in that long poster over there and find more about the Czech National Trust and about their programs that they try basically to save some historical sites in the Czech Republic. Tonight we have the special opportunity to welcome Martin Putna, Czech literary historian, critic, and author of works on history and religion. Martin will present his recent book, Rus-Ukraine-Russia, that was published by the University of Chicago Press. Martin is a literary historian, critic, translator, teacher, and author of works on history and religion. Former head of Knihovna Václava Havla in Prague. Martin is currently professor of social and cultural anthropology at Charles University in Prague. His many books include Václav Havel, a spiritual portrait in the context of 20th-century Czech culture from 2011. He just signed it for me, my copy. If you have it here, you have a chance. And this book explores religious influences on Havel's thought. And the book won the Tom Stoppard Prize. Martin is an outspoken civic opponent of pro-Russian, authoritarian, and far-right streams in contemporary Czech society. During the presidential campaign of 2013, he strongly criticized presidential candidate Miloš Zeman for his pro-Putin leaning. Since 2015, Martin has repeatedly engaged in public actions in support of Ukraine, against Russian political influence in the Czech Republic, and against xenophobia. Before I pass the mic to Martin, I'd like to invite Mirek Konvalina, the director of the Czech Center New York, that is partner of our tonight's program. Thank you very much, and I'd like to ask Mirek to tell us more about your programs and about Martin's program and engagement during his current trip. Thank you.
Thank you, Pavla. I don't want to steal the show, and I know we were waiting for Martin. Martin was invited here by Professor Milan Babík from Colby College in Maine. We just came back from the conference called Havel and Our Crisis with Timothy Snyder, Marcy Shore, Paul Wilson, and Jacques Rupnik, and Michal Žantovský, and Martin Putna. I'm glad that he can be here, and if Pavla mentioned programs, if you like something completely different, join us on Thursday. We have a bluegrass concert with top American bluegrass players and Rostia Čapek, who is making banjos for American stars. So please welcome Martin Putna.
Ladies and gentlemen, dámy a pánové, vážené dámy, господа, in case someone is here who prefers this language. Unfortunately, I'm not able to speak Ukrainian, just read. But I cannot speak to in Ukrainian, which is my fault. It is my pleasure to be here. It is my pleasure to have you here. But it was not my pleasure to write this book. On the contrary, I hated this work, and I hate it still, but it was my duty. It was my duty. The book is actually quite old because it's been written during the first Ukrainian Revolution, so-called Maidan Revolution in 2014, and it was the moment when the Russian propaganda really strongly attacked the Czech public opinion through different channels, saying and emphasizing and arguing that there is no such thing as Ukraine, and that there always was just Russia, and that we as Czechs, we are just Slavs. So we are all of us part of basically the great Slavonic family, ergo the true subjects of Russian Tsar, whatever he is being called, Tsar or president or generální sekretář komunistické party. And it was the time that I decided that it's necessary to write this book quickly, as quickly as I can. Which does not mean that in my country there are no more people who are familiar with Russian history. We have wonderful historians, we have reporters who lived in Russia for years and know all the dissident movement and know all the stuff. But I thought that I was probably, unfortunately, the only one who understands the religious part, the religious background of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, and you are probably majority of you Americans, so there is no need to explain to you how religion is important for defining identities, constructing identities. What does it mean? What did it mean to be American in a religious sense? And how long work and walk has it been from the times of Mayflower, when to be American meant to be basically Puritan, etc., to the present state. And so I decided to, so to speak, summarize several years of my lecturing at Charles University, where I had lectures, I think, 5 years about so-called ancient Russian history, ancient Russian religion, culture, etc., and to create a brief overview explaining why Ukraine is not Russia, and that the same word, Russia, can have and has many meanings, and that the Russian propaganda, as generally known, works with many simplifications and several big lies, and maybe the biggest lie of all is the idea of Russia being always the same. Russia means autocracy, Russia means one ideology, be it Marxism, Leninism or Orthodoxy, doesn't matter that much, but it is still one ideology forced by the ruling party, and again, be it Communist Party or Russian Orthodox Church, or both of them at once, as we can see it in the present situation. There is no big difference between the 5-point red star and the Orthodox cross. But there is a difference between the Russian Patriarch Kirill and the Russian communists. There is no basic difference. It's just slight difference in colors, but the significance is the same. So I decided to show that, well, this is the picture of Russia as the Russian propaganda wants us to see it. But the history, the religious history, the spiritual history, the cultural history is much more tricky. On the contrary, it's infinitely tricky. And there are many Russias And now we are in trouble, in linguistic trouble, because if we say in English Russia, it's just simply Russia, the state. But there is old Slavonic word Rus. It's feminine, means she, Rus, which is the country, maybe the nation. And in the history, there have been many different Rus. Says, oh, it's really difficult to say in English, and I admire my wonderful translator, Michael Dean, who somehow dealt with many, was able to deal with so many linguistic plays, not just with terms Rus, Russia, etc. And so I try to make this short, it's quite a short summary, showing how many Russias Rus existed during the history, and how many nations and how many religious formations played a certain role, and how many versions existed of what did it mean to be Russian, and why Ukrainians say, well, the heritage of the initial Rus, of the Kievan Rus, it is our heritage. Not their heritage, not of those who are called in Ukrainian, it's not very polite term, definitely the Muscovites. We are, Ukrainians say, we are Russians in the original sense. They are Muscovites, they are something different. So now please let me, I hope you allow me to help my memory with some reading and some, I just have no memory because the book is old. The book is old, as I said, it's from the 2014, 2015, and it took several years since the translation. Actually, there were also some obstacles because some people close to our president tried to how to say politely. Some people did not want this book be translated. And I must not name the names because it's very in unofficial ways, but there were such official people. So finally, in the last year, thanks to Chicago University Press, it has been published. And last year I said, well, now it's a little bit over. The actuality of the book is over, and you see, since February 2024, everything is back. And I must say something. February 24, people usually were shocked. How could this happen? Said we still believed, usually people believe that Putin, after all, is a realistic politician and he's not going to do such a mad thing. And what is going to happen now? I must say something. You know what does mean the C in my name? People usually ask me in Czech, what does it mean? That is some mysterious middle name. I say no, usually no, it's just a letter, nothing. But after all, and after specifically after February 24, I said, well, maybe it's Cassandra. You probably know who Cassandra was. It was the Greek prophetess, the unhappy lady who had the gift to say things, very unpleasant things, to be right, but at the same time having the curse from the god Apollo that no one believed her. And so February 24th, I felt some very bitter relief. Okay, so I was Cassandra. I was prophesying all the time and telling in the newspapers and in Czech TV and Czech radio again and again, don't make business with Putin. Do not trust Putin. And virtually everyone was answering, well, you are exaggerating, it is not that bad, and you are demonizing Russia. February 24th changed everything. Okay, so unfortunately the book is now quite good for this time, and again I'm not happy. I'm absolutely not happy. So back to the topic, and let me summarize how many Russias there were. Okay, and this is the beginning. It is the Czech guild. Definitely when talking about the guild, definitely Putin is to blame, and we can discuss then, probably then usually, then after during Q&As we can discuss that in so far the so-called ordinary Russians are to be blamed. We can discuss it later. But we are in the Bohemian National Hall, and so we have to ask as well, is there anything like Czech historical guild in this? Definitely not after February 24, because after so many years I'm so proud of my country. Since we accepted so many thousand refugees and doing wonderful job, and one colleague of mine, preacher, said, well, after all, we passed the exam from humanism. Whereas several years ago, when the wave of Syrian refugees was present, we failed in this exam. And now, fortunately, we passed. So where is the Czech guild? Well, the Czech guild it was us who invented Panslavism in 19th century. Actually, there were two Slovaks. Jan Kollár and Pavel Josef Šafařík. One Protestant priest, very liberal priest, liberal preacher according to today's standards, and Šafařík, archaeologist, linguist, etc. And those two guys, Slovaks writing in Czech, definitely as it was usual in the time, invented the idea that all the nations speaking Slavonic languages basically do belong to one unity, that all of them are parts of this Slavonic empire, being it spiritual empire or real empire, which means Russian empire. And Jan Kollár, that was another book of mine, commentary of Jan Kollár's Slavice, rather the famous like epic about Slavonic nations and Slavonic languages, really believed, or at least he pretended that he really believed, that Russian and Czech and Polish and Serbo-Croatian, speaking in a very simple way, are just four dialects of one and the same language. And the Czech and Slovaks have no real place in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that it would be much better to join the Russian Empire. And after those two guys invented Panslavism as a theoretical, literary, poetical concept, the Russians said, well, the elite, part of the elite said, well, that's not a good idea. Let's use it. And all the Czech and Slovak history in 19th century is a history of Panslavism and attempts to correct Panslavism. And all the national art, literature, music, many operas of Smetana, Dvořák, paintings up to Mucha and others are obsessed with the idea of Slavonic nations creating, after all, one nation. And that the Polish history and Bulgarian history and Macedonian history and Ukrainian history, if they were aware of existence of separate Ukraine nation and language, create just one whole. Fortunately, there was also the other stream, namely the critical one. And it is a historical positive role of America, that America played so important moment in correcting the pan-Slavism, since it was specifically Masaryk, the first Czechoslovak president, as you perfectly know, married to an American lady, Charlotte Garrick, who studied Russia deeply studied Russian history, Russian literature, but not as a literary criticist, but as a sociologist, and warned in his seminal work, Rusko a Evropa, typically for the time published first in German, Russland und Europa, and after they translated into Czech as Rusko a Evropa, Russia and Europe, trying to discern several streams in Russian history, in Russian spirituality. Basically, Masaryk said there are two Russias. He uses metaphor of Moscow and Petersburg. The Muscovite Russia and the Petersburg Russia. What does it mean? The Muscovite Russia, it is the Putin Russia, as if, which means the autocratic, the anti-European, the anti-democratic, the one which is so satisfied with achievement of Russian state, of Russian army, with the orthodoxy saying, well, orthodoxy is the best religion. And why is that? Well, because we do say it. Because it's our national religion. And because of the state religion. And because our worships are the longest worships at all, as anyone can compare with other worships. I am a little bit ironic, but sorry, I'm being ironic. The book is also very ironic. And the other Russia is the Peterburgian, named after the second alternative capital of Russia. And this is the, so to speak, pro-European, pro-Western, a little bit pro-democratic Russia, saying, well, the language is different, the culture is different, but still we share at least the same aesthetic values, the same philosophical values, and let's say cooperation. And it's very rough division, definitely. You can find among writers working in Petersburg much of nationalism, much of Russian national pride and suprematism and everything. On the contrary, in Moscow, you can find a lot of irony, specifically the grotesque literature in 20th century, but Masaryk did not live to see it. This grotesque literature, which practically ended in 30s, since Stalin executed them all. But then as a phoenix from ashes, again in Russia, specifically in Moscow, other writers, other poets, other underground activists started again, not fight the state with guns or with demonstrations. It was impossible, but with jokes, with making laugh at them, which is the autocracy hates at most. If you not just fight it, but if you laugh at it. On the other hand, Masaryk himself, our venerable president, wonderful man, a deep scientist, had no sense of humor, and so I'm afraid, had he had the opportunity to read this new Muscovite grotesque anti-Russian literature, it wouldn't be his cup of tea, so to speak. And so, back to my book, from Masaryk book. Actually, I prefer to speak about other people's books than about my books. Nonetheless, I took up this idea of two different Russias, the Muscovite and the Peterburgian, and worked with this metaphor, using how many? 15, 16 or something. Sorry, now I need one more hand. Let How many scenes there are? 19 after all, 19. So, let's put it very shortly. Russia before Russia. What does it mean? It does mean what the Greek historians said about Russia. And what did they say about Russia? Well, Herodotus speaks very much about Scythia, which is today's Ukraine, because Herodotus traveled to Crimea. Crimea is the first part of northern Eastern Europe, which was involved into the horizon of Greek civilization, where the Greek cities were founded in the 7th, 6th century ago, and Herodotus is describing the peoples living over there as definitely barbarians, because for a Greek writer, everyone who is not Greek is barbarian. It's Greece. It's Greece. No illusions about them. They were pretty racist in this aspect. The area of Crimea and of Ukraine was involved in the Greek horizon. And for instance, the famous myth about Iphigenia, the daughter of King Agamemnon, happens in Crimea. Present in many operas and plays in the era of European classicism. So there was the first moment. But this is just as a sort of prologue to all it. Then you have the real foundation, and this is the Viking Rus. The term Rus is not Slavonic. It's German. It's German, or maybe, I mean, it's even more tricky. It's from some Finnish languages, which I do not pretend to master. So there are people who pretend that they understand all languages in the world, which is not my case. Anyway, even the Russian chronicle, the ancient chronicle, says that the Slavs living in the area of Kiev invited German princes, saying, well, please rule us. You know it better. You know how to rule society. Which is quite strange if you imagine national first chronicle written in the monastery, connected with the prince, with the state, and says, well, the origin of our dynasty, our state, is not Slavonic, it's German. Viking, so northern. What does it mean? It does mean that, first of all, that the pre-modern Russia, as in general pre-modern Europe, did not know nationalism in modern sense. And second moment, that this moment of inviting Germans is crucial, and it's being repeated again and again in Russian history. This inviting of German craftsmen, German officers, German academics, when the first university started in St. Petersburg, there were German professors who were invited to teach, because there were no Russian academics at that time. So there is this never-ending stream of German influence in Russian culture, which does not mean a supremacy of German culture over Russian culture. It's just, so to speak, destroying of the idea of unique, uncorrupted Slavic culture. Usually there were German academics who discovered archaeology of Russia, described the genealogy of and similarities of Slavonic languages, etc. It just means the interconnection of Russian culture with the German and in general in European culture. Then there is the role of paganism and several modern attempts to come back to paganism, sometimes having quite interesting cultural impact. Here in New York there is a museum of Nikolaus Rerich, an exile painter who worked basically all his career with this idea of that the original Slavonic and Russian religion was the paganism and that it is necessary to somehow revive it. On the other hand, Rerich worked and was thinking in context of international Western revival of esoterics and Hermetism and occultism, etc. So if we try to find original Slavonic religious culture, we cannot escape the framework of modern versions. It's either it's science of religion, analytic interpretation, or if you try to immerse in it and revive it, it's always occultism. When I was today walking here in the neighborhood, I discovered that one street in 72nd Street there is a theosophic loggia. Well, it's the context of reviving Slavonic paganism. Scene 4: Kievan Rus and Byzantine Christianity. Okay, I have to be a little bit brief. German influence, paganism. Kievan Rus means the Greek influence. So if we speak about Orthodoxy, it's basically always Byzantine Orthodoxy. The language is, even if it is not Greek, but it is very literal translation from Greek. And one of the paradoxes of this ancient Orthodoxy is that the wonderful founders of Slavonic literature, the Saint Cyrus and Methodius, translated the Greek texts into Old Slavonic, but somehow forgot to teach their pupils Greek, which meant that the Orthodox clergy, Orthodox academics in the Middle Ages could work only with those texts that already had been translated from Greek and were unable to continue in translation, let alone to go to the sources. And what has been translated? Tiny segment of Greek literature, of Greek Orthodox literature, let alone the Greek classical literature, which left the Kievan Orthodoxy in a very awkward position. That they were told, this is the Orthodox liturgy, you have to keep it, even if you do not understand the context. Long story short. But still, on the other hand, the Kievan Rus, namely the first principality, whose heritage is claimed both by Ukrainians and the Russians, still was a European state, led by originally German dynasty, having the ideological framework in the Byzantine Orthodoxy, and exchanging goods and princesses and saints and martyrs and relics and everything with other European states. So today, when Ukrainians say the Kievan heritage means that we are and we always have been part of Europe, is based really on historical evidence, since Kievan state, as said, was just another European principality. There were connections between Kievan state and Polish state, Kievan state and Czech state. Still you have in Ukrainian and Russian the names of Czech saints: Vyacheslav, Václav, Ludmila. This from all this time from the as if golden age of 12th and 13th century. And then the catastrophe came. The catastrophe, namely the invasion of Mongols in 13th century, which does not mean that every Mongolian man or woman of today is to be blamed for the invasion. But at that time, that meant the complete destruction of this ancient Kievan Rus, of this ancient Ukraine, meant that the large area of Eastern Europe was not part of Europe anymore. That the spiritual center was not anymore in toward west, but toward east. Somewhere in the steppe, somewhere when the capital of Mongolian Empire was located, which was not completely clear where this empire had its capital. And then, absolutely another state is coming into picture. This is the Muscovite Rus. Centuries after Kievan Rus was destroyed by the Mongolian invasion, new state far more east started with the center in Muscovia and with ideology completely opposite to the Kievan, because the Kievan still was saying we are part of Christian civilization together with Byzantium, with Bohemia, with Poland, etc., etc. We are something different. And so if we look for the origins of today's Russian ideology, of this Russian uniqueness, of the Russian special mission for the world, for this opposition between Muscovia, Russia and West, we have to start in the 14th, 15th century, and we have to name his first famous proponent, and this is Ivan the Terrible in 16th century. A person who, although had this surname Terrible, was loved and is loved and celebrated as the first great Russian Tsar. And you have this line, trans-ideological line, Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, Lenin, Stalin and Putin. Why not Gorbachev? Because Gorbachev was not successful in promoting the state, in making the empire broader. Whereas Ivan the Terrible, Peter the Great, Catherine definitely, then the Tsars of 19th century, and then Lenin and Stalin, regardless of the difference in the ideology. So the idea that Russia is the only state, actually. It started in the 16th century, also it had a religious background, because in the meantime, the great schisma between Eastern Church and Western Church happened, so both churches proclaimed a curse against the other half of the church. So you are heretics, you are not Christians at all. And after the Byzantine Empire fall in 15th century, when the Turks conquered Tsargrad, Constantinople, Istanbul, Russia was the only Orthodox state saying, so the Catholics are heretics, Catholics are not Christians at all. So Russia is the only state. And so it has a mission from God to rule the world. And basically, not much changed. Only the specific ideological means changed. In 20th century, it was Marxism-Leninism. The Western is rotten, capitalist, dying, perverse. And today we have this mix, this postmodern mix of everything. But the idea of Russian uniqueness was still there. But this is not the whole story. This is not the whole story. I'm sorry, I started to speak too broadly, so I have to be really very brief. But this is not the whole story. There were always other alternative Russias, other alternative Rus. First of all, it was the Western Rus, means the today Ukraine, today Belarus, and other some parts of Central Russia, being in 16th and 17th century not part of Muscovia, but part of Rzeczpospolita, this Central Eastern European state, which was, regarding the context of 16th, 17th century, quite progressive, quite free, quite tolerant, both in religious and national aspect. Actually, today in Central Park, I discovered a statue. I'm not sure whether the statue was there during my last visit. I'm not sure. A statue of Jagiello. The Prince Jagiello. Inscription says the prince who started the state of free nations of Central East Europe. I'm not sure whether it was Polish government or doesn't matter who sponsored this statue, but the inscription is very telling. This is saying the Central Eastern Europe space does not necessarily belong to Russia. Is not necessarily anti-democratic, autocratic. There is tradition of Central Eastern Europe being also a democratic state. Definitely, it was not democracy in our standards. It was the aristocratic democracy. The democracy consisting basically in this that the king has been elected. The king's power was quite weak. Then every aristocrat could practically say, I do not agree with some legislation, and so in practical politics, the Polish state, the Rzeczpospolita, yes, was weak. The autocratic Russia was much more efficient. But if we look to the history, if we look for moments that can be inspiring for us, in case we consider democracy our ideal, if we still wish to keep and improve our democracy, then definitely the Polish pre-modern state is much more close to our ideals than the autocratic Russia. And there is a big discussion between the Russian intellectuals, including Ivan the Terrible, and with the Polish intellectuals or Ukrainian intellectuals in 16th, 17th century. Both sides emphasizing the priorities and strong aspects of their rule. The one, the Western party, says we are much more free. The other party says we are much more efficient. So it reminds me another American pop culture moment. A few days ago, I was watching again Angels in America, the Tony Kushner's the film made after Tony Kushner's plays. And there is this terrible character called Roy Cohn, who did many wrong things, and when his colleague, his pupil, says him, well, what you did do was not legal. And Roy Cohn answers, was it not legal? Fuck legal. Was it not nice? Fuck nice. You have to be efficient. And I was efficient. And this is exactly this, so to speak, Muscovite ideology. You have to be efficient. Ivan the Terrible says we are efficient. Look at the states. Look at the state of the state, how the empire is still growing. And yes, it was growing. On the map, the Russian empire was still growing and growing. And so, still you have those countercultures. The Western, Rus, Ukraine, or the internal Russian counterculture. Again, we have to thank America for the term counterculture. Another just the book of mine, but I wrote several articles about Theodor Roszak, the theoretical of what counterculture is. And if today everywhere in the world, in Russia as well, in Czech Republic, everywhere, there are countercultural circles, attempts, I don't know, in politics, literature, in political squatting, whatever. And I'm not very much leftist myself, but in contemporary Czech culture and Czech society, I sometimes feel that it's my duty to defend the squatters, the countercultural circles, saying, well, it is something which is crucial for every society to have those who, do not respect the system completely. Sometimes they're moving on the edge of law, but they are showing some holes in our justice, in our culture, something that should be improved, should be done differently. And the same is in the Russian culture. The countercultures, usually religious. In pre-modern time, they are usually religious. Let me just name one of them, and this is the tradition of holy fools. So-called in Russian term, yurodivie, which means yurodivie is from term urod. In Old Slavonic means someone who was born a strange way. Translated queer. This idea of this it came to my head right now. You can call them queer. Who were yurodivie? They were people who were provoked, whose way of living was provoking the official religious culture. Those who, in the time of fasting, in their streets somewhere eating meat, who rushed into worship and cried something and shouting, whatever. Not all of them, but some of them being venerated and then proclaimed to be saint. What is the most iconic building in Moscovia? Vasily Blazhený, exactly. Who was this Vasily Blazhený? Vasily the Holy Fool. Vasily was the Holy Fool. The same term, Blazhený, is again Old Slavonic term from someone who is crazy. Blazhený, blázen. With this strange wordplay, Blazhený, like someone who is happy, and blázen, someone who is fool. And you have it both in the same one. And if you look at the modern Russian culture, we can see that this archetype of holy fools is coming back in strange behavior of certain artists who play games, provoke, make their performances, behave on the edge of normality, because what else they can do in the society which is so normative, in the society which allows so few opportunities to express that you do not agree completely with the state and Tsar and church, etc. So just playing fools, just provoking. It's not pre-modern time anymore, so you can be venerated by some friends, but definitely you very quickly get in trouble, get in touch with the state police, and we all know the consequences, theoretically, fortunately, in this country. And if we see the most famous musical and social and political group of last year, the Pussy Riot, it is the revival, the exact revival of what holy fools were doing. Their famous performance in the Church of Christ the Savior. It was exactly what was doing Vasily Blazhin in the 16th century. Just let us remind what they did. They prepared. No one knows how they succeeded in preparing it in secret. I did a performance in the church, preparing cameras and then playing the song with the anthem, with the chorus. The Holy Virgin chased Putin out of Russia. The production took about 3 minutes. After that, the security rushed after them, and the girls were imprisoned for offending the religious feeling of blah 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 of the nation, etc. And well, many people. I don't know how in America, but in my country, there was some hesitation. Well, was it not too much to make this provocation in the church, in the central church of Moscow? And in what other place than in the central church of Christ the Savior you shall say that the Putin's regime is diabolical? That if Putin says, I am the Christian Tsar, that this is the worst thing which religious person could say, the biggest lie. In what other place? And my book, written 8 years ago, ends with sort of urban legend, or with a feeling which was present in 2013, 2014, that this prayer, "O Virgin Mary, chase Putin out of Russia, chase him to the hell," that this prayer is being prayed all over Russia. There were rumors, there were sayings, some people living in different regions of Russia said, well, I know that someone said it politely, quietly in somebody's church, in order no one could listen, just the Virgin Mary. And please, Virgin Mary, chase Putin out of Russia. Apparently, at that time, it was not enough. But after those 8 years, you can say, well, the Russian counterculture did not succeed. All my friends, or friends of my friends, who were involved in the Russian counterculture, artists, activists, had total desperation. They either left Russia, or still surviving somewhere, but expecting the worst, if they are not imprisoned at that time. So this idea, which I shared also, that there is the other, better Russia, waiting for its moment. The regime is so strong on the surface that there must be groups believing and preparing some better future, waiting for the opportunity. Apparently it was not enough. So, if we identify Rus with Russia, there would be a very sad end of this story. So that belief in other, better Russia was wrong, and that there is no hope, and there will be no hope for years. But this is not the whole story, because, as you know from history, sorry I was very brief, how could I read all of my book in one lecture? So this the other Russia, the other Rus, the Ukraine, claiming We are the initial Rus. We are the heirs. Ukraine, unlike Russia, experienced some humanism in the 15th century, some Baroque, some classicism. It is a country which is in majority Orthodox, as Russia is. But as you see, being an Orthodox country does not mean necessarily that the country is anti-democratic. And on the contrary, what is the core of Ukrainian identity? In Russian, in the Muscovite identity, you see the identification. The Tsar, the nation, the army, the church, and all they are one. I pokażem, що ми братя козацького роду. Those are two verses from the Ukrainian national anthem. And let us show, brothers, that we are from the Cossack origin. What does mean Cossack origin? Cossacks were, well, there are so-called Cossacks in Russia as well, but this is basically Putin's another secret police. Is another story. But in Ukrainian tradition, the Cossacks were basically free people, free warriors, living freely on the edge, in the sometimes in the no man's land between Poland, Russia, and Turkey, and obeying to no one. And so this is the strong and also, yes, the weak part of what Ukraine is. This ancient military democracy, again, not a perfect democracy by our standards, but the democracy of founding fathers also had some weak parts when we want democracy of today is, you know perfectly what I was speaking about. So Ukraine can claim and claims it even in the anthem. We were and we are the Democrats. We are the free people. And in this incredible ability to defend their country, we can see against the Russian invasion, we can see not just wonderful patriotism, and not just help of Western weapons, but also this belief that we fight better because we are free. We have this tradition of free warriors. And going back to the ancient archetypes and remembering that Crimea was a part of Greek civilization. What is it? What is this archetype? It is the Greece, the little Greece, defending itself against the Persian invasion. And this is the same Herodotus and the other Greek historians emphasizing, yes, we defended ourselves because we are free people. And that is why we fight better than the slaves of the Tsar. So I would end in a positive way. Yes, it's the old Herodotus in 5th century, before our era, prophesizing that Ukraine will defend not just Ukraine, but defend us and our belief. The freedom is, after all, still better than autocracy, even if autocracy is efficient, as the Roy Cohn believes. And I don't believe in Roy Cohn's too. No. Thank you.
There is a road beyond this one. It's called the path we don't yet take. I can feel how it longs to be entered as we go along this one, and we live